sorry, everybody except for you, because you have to ring the bell. Oh, you can sit down too. Because we do, or stand, because we do the 3 times first. When I enter, it's a medium bong. And then a quiet one. And then a loud one. Ching ching. Can I be seen? Am I in the picture?
You need to be a little bit this way.
You can come around this way.
Teisho, Chat.
encountered even in millions of ages. Now we see it, hear it, receive and maintain it. May we completely realize the Tathagata's true meaning. John, and just some preliminaries. Do we have any participants?
We do.
Okay. And if those of you on the live chat could just give a yes or no in terms of the audio, like, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Recently, I've been thinking about the meaning of progress. Something that crops up again and again in my life, partly because I do like technology. And, you know, there are a lot of advancements in technological realms every day. Our practice tradition doesn't really frequently talk about progress because we tend to be a bit conservative, for good reason. But there are some things where I think progress does enter into our practice in meaningful ways. And I think you could probably unplug the power behind you and it'll stop the fan. Just mind the battery. Yeah, in fact, as I think most of you know, at least for a couple more months, I will be continuing in my career as a faculty member at a community college, and I've been playing around with one form of technology that, as of December, was like a really watershed moment in terms of artificial intelligence progress. I'm speaking here specifically of the Chat GPT artificial intelligence system, which is absolutely, truly astounding and is making many people quake in their boots because its ability to mimic human language use is truly astounding. So I think as Americans in the 21st century, being in a very technologically advanced kind of society, we're very accustomed to hearing about progress in all shapes and forms, all kinds of things. But I want to back up and examine the word for just a second. I mean, I think, before we think about it too much, progress probably seems to us like the concept of human-driven change producing benefits, producing things that we find advantageous. And we can see certain examples of that all the time. Like, for example, medical science and technological science created these wonderful vaccines that help to protect us from the ravages of COVID-19. And I don't know about you, but I'm pretty grateful for that. But it doesn't take too long before we kind of find maybe a more skeptical view of progress. And this comes up for me all the time when I think about our environmental and climate crisis. I mean, it's right now a climate emergency. It's so severe that it is literally threatening, don't know if it will happen, but threatening to produce a mass extinction event that would wipe out most plant and animal species, including human beings. And this was all engendered by moments of so-called progress in the past, namely, primarily the combustion engine and the burning of fossil fuels that gave us huge amounts of energy and a fantastic standard of living. People all over the world, almost all over the world, enjoy the benefits of it for now, but it comes at a price. There's always a price. For every advantage, there's a disadvantage. Well, where our practice is concerned, I have a tendency to see if I can find answers to my questions in the life of the Buddha. And you could look at the life of the Buddha, the story that we tell about the life of the Buddha, as one of trying to achieve some kind of progress. Progress in the sense of, hey guys, I want to discover a spiritual way to bring the end to human suffering. Suffering associated with old age, sickness, and death. And we take it on faith, amongst other reasons, that he succeeded. And we are the beneficiaries of the progress he made. And then we can look at our own lives too and ask ourselves, have we made any progress? Sometimes, the hour hand on the practice clock moves so slowly, we aren't sure anymore if progress has been made or not. But, if you really think back carefully, you've probably dropped away at least some of your coarser attachments, forms of self-clinging that you recognize immediately you really didn't need and they were not helpful to you and other people. And as a consequence, you, let's say, might have become clearer about the universal law of impermanence. You might have become clearer about how impermanence applies to your own life, and how so many of our attachments are born of a failure to recognize this fundamental fact about ourselves. Some of you will probably easily say that you're less driven by ego and more by a sense of compassion. I remember a former student saying that she used to drive down Jabavi Avenue deliberately tailgating anyone who was just driving the speed limit, trying to push them along. But after, a year or two of practice, she stopped doing that. Perfect example of making progress on the path even before there's, any kind of significant breakthrough or Kensho experience. You just reflect on your attachments and you go, man, that's just not a good thing to do. There's a better thing to do. Give people some space. Obey the law. But there are some other kinds of, let's say there are some other views of progress in our practice that might not be so healthy. It might sound like a bit of an exaggeration, but we could maybe say they are sort of sickened views or sick views, not really clinically sick, but well, unwholesome views of progress as it might apply to our path. And I will get into that in a minute here. But I was thunderstruck by there's a new teacher in the White Plum, and they happen to be teaching on this very theme of progress on the way. And I wanted to read what they wrote. It's 3 short paragraphs. So, quote, "From a spiritual perspective, progress can be seen as a journey towards a deeper understanding of oneself and the world around us, as well as a movement towards greater harmony, compassion, and unity with all beings. Rather than measuring progress solely in terms of material and technological advancements, a spiritual approach to progress places greater emphasis on the development of inner qualities such as wisdom, love, and compassion. Spiritual progress involves a process of self-discovery and self-transformation, in which one becomes increasingly aware of their own thoughts, emotions, and beliefs, and seeks to align them with higher spiritual principles. Ultimately, the goal of spiritual progress is to awaken to our true nature as spiritual beings, and to live in a state of unity consciousness where we recognize the interconnectedness of all things and act with love and compassion towards all beings. From this perspective, progress is not measured in terms of external accomplishments, but rather in the degree to which we embody spiritual qualities such as love, wisdom, and compassion in our daily lives." I don't think I could have said it better myself. Does anybody know who this teacher is? Hohen knows, because I did violate the secrecy of the teisho beforehand to tell her, because I had a expletive eating grin on my face. It was Chat GPT. Those are the words, unaltered, of an artificial intelligence. And I could not agree with them more. Now, unfortunately for Chat GPT, I also asked, what is your response to the Mu koan? And it gave me a conceptual answer. I said, you're just thinking. That's an idea. That's conceptual. Give me an experiential response. And it gave me another conceptual one. We do this too, don't we? Mm-hmm. Until we don't. And if artificial intelligence progress makes you nervous, just keep in mind, ChatGPT will never, ever be enlightened. It could pretend to be, but that's all. But, what Chat wrote there is kind of what we want. I mean, we're all here right now, presumably working towards some kind of clarifying moment, aren't we? Some sort of milestone that would mark a line between ourselves as sentient beings and ourselves as bodhisattvas, maybe. Between our naive and green spiritual past and a more fully ripened spiritual future. Ideally speaking, there should be some kind of breakthrough. We might call it Kensho. Maybe Satori, but Kensho. After which everything is, we imagine, clearer, maybe easier, more serene, or whatever you think it is. And that would be a kind of progress, would it not? Else, why do we waste our time sitting on our bums when we could be out there playing disc golf? or chatting with a robot. I asked Gendo Roshi, and this happened more than once, do you think I'm progressing? Just as several of you have recently asked me the same question exactly. And she never said yes or no. She would usually say that I was doing fine, which was kind of disappointing. I don't know what I wanted from her exactly, but I wanted a little more than "you're doing fine." And she would smile knowingly. Sometimes she would add, "just keep going." Yeah, so it wasn't a very satisfying answer, but when you think about it, what would be? I mean, think about it. What answer would have put an end to my doubts about my progress along the way? Oh, Gendo, dude, you have surpassed the Buddhas of old. I forgot to say to our viewers, if you have questions at any point, just put them in the chat and Kyonan will relay them to me. Have we had anything yet? I forgot to say that. I'm sorry. Yeah, I mean, what would have worked for me? Because, really, if you have to ask, you're not there yet. If you need someone else to roar for you, you're not the lion. Some people begin to believe that they are the lion. They're desperate. And so they roar, and they think it sounds like roar, and the whole temple shudders. But actually, what everybody hears is meow. So when you guys ask me about your progress, and everyone does, sooner or later, they do. It's hard to avoid. But I don't know what to say exactly. You're doing fine. You are. You're here. I can encourage students, tell them that I see progress, even if they don't, and it's true. But I just also know from my own personal experience that as long as one has to ask, one is never quite sure of oneself. And it's right here that we kind of get into the nub of this issue of progress. When we think about our practice in terms of progress from the perspective of acquisition, like the moment we lay a yardstick on the Zafu, we create a psychological separation between ourselves and Zen. It's like there's Zen out there somewhere, like it's a restaurant or a mall, and then there's us, and we think that we can go out there and get it, the Zen thing that we want, with our grasping mind. But when we put Zen at a remove like that, it's easy to start to develop these expectations that may not be fulfilled. We have, let's say, expectations of Zen as opposed to expectations for ourselves. We fall into a view that we should be able to get something from Zen in much the same way as we go to the store to get a new shirt or a pair of shoes. It's what I call this the smorgasbord approach to Zen. You just slide your Zen tray along the rail, hoping for a tasty glop of food. And, in the beginning, you get it. It happens miraculously, which just reinforces it all. Like, for example, some people decide early on that they want to receive the precepts. But what they secretly want, really, is a Zen name, because that's cool. And a Raksu, because that's also cool, like status symbol stuff. And they have no idea how heavy the Raksu is. The iron yoke that has no hole. And even if you didn't go into Jukai with that kind of mindset, it's still kind of hard to completely avoid comparisons between ourselves and other people. But after a while, these first little morsels, well, we grow tired of them, don't we? And that's when some pretty serious doubts begin to emerge. I'm not just talking about mere skepticism here. What we start to experience really is this doubt mass. Like, I believe the Buddha was enlightened and lots of other people were and are, but I just can't imagine that happening for myself. So, why am I doing this? I just had that question this morning. I had it in last week's Doksan. And the week before that, a similar question. Why am I doing this? When am I going to be enlightened? Why can't I, after all this time, get what I want? I mean, you put in a lot of time on the cushion, you chanted, you cooked food, you swept the floor, you did all the things, and it still doesn't happen. So why? What am I getting out of this? Why am I doing this? Why should I? Well, for my money, there's nothing inherently wrong with these questions. I think they're really good questions, actually. It's just that if they are kind of infected with this sort of unwholesome sense of what progress is, they only make that separation between this life and the goal so much greater. The gap is wider. The barrier is harder or more difficult to pass through. We pit our ideas and expectations about Zen against our potential for awakening. And that in turn creates some pretty intense friction, let me tell you. Friction that leads quite naturally to feelings of confusion, frustration, disappointment, discouragement. On the one hand, we want enlightenment. Check. On the other hand, we're not getting it. Check. There must be something wrong, therefore. Check. Or there's something wrong with me. Or my teacher. Or Zen itself. Otherwise, I'd be there, man. I would be the most deeply enlightened Buddha walking the earth right now. But we're not there. And even after discouragement can come desperation. Just outright desperation. Black, terrible desperation. I mean, it sounds bad, doesn't it? And I've been there. Yeah. Now you might think that I'm trying to warn you about this, like I'm saying, hey, don't work yourself up to the point of desperation. But actually, I'm kind of not. I think it might not be so bad. I've talked before about how the sixth patriarch, he had to run away from some other monks, they were just going to take away the hereditary objects, the bowl and the robe of transmission, because they just didn't think that this illiterate southern Chinese person should be the sixth patriarch. Really, the head monk ought to be. The sixth patriarch had to run away into the mountains. He had a couple days head start, but unfortunately this entourage of angry monks, sounds like a video game, caught up to him, because in the lead was a former military commander, a general who knew how to track people and chase them down. And they did. They caught him in the mountains. Well, Hui Neng, sixth patriarch, he knew the jig was up, so he just put the bowl and the robe on a rock and said, okay, take it. You know, these are symbols of our tradition. They're not the thing itself. And the person who wanted them so desperately, use that key word, so desperately, reached out to pick them up, thinking then he would be the sixth patriarch. It was sort of like the sword and the stone. He couldn't do it. He couldn't pick them up. They were too heavy. He was shaking. He was crying. That's how desperate he was. And he turned to Wei Neng, the sixth patriarch, and he said, basically he said, teach me. And the sixth patriarch said what? Anybody know?
What was your original face before your mother and father were born?
Before your parents were born, yes, exactly. Thank you, Chion. That's exactly what he said. And at that particular moment, in his state of absolute and utter desperation, in which he would have done anything to be enlightened, he became enlightened. Desperation is very uncomfortable. It's a very risky place to be. But that spirit of being willing to do anything is full of potential. It's really the door to awakening. And it's quite a door. It does not look very promising. We gotta say that. It's honestly the least appealing door you've ever seen. It's not like the door to the Zen Mall. It's not like one of those beautiful red kami gates in the water in these little bays in Japan. No, you're standing here at the door to, an outhouse in West Michigan. That's your door to enlightenment, baby. Or maybe it's just a door in a neighborhood you don't belong in. And the paint is peeling and the glass is broken and you hear screams on the other side. I don't want to go there. And because you already know the title of this talk, you probably know what other kind of door came to my mind. That would be like the black iron gate of Mordor. Impossible to pass through. But dang! The Buddha is standing right up there, on top of the black gate to Mordor. What's he doing up there? He's got the gesture of no fear. This one, his hands like this. That means no fear. This mudra, abhaya mudra. If you're familiar with J.R.R. Tolkien and the Lord of the Rings trilogy, you know that the Black Gate of Mordor is a barrier and a door at the same time. It's simultaneously a point of separation and connection, and in that sense it works like images of gates in ancient Chinese culture. Tiananmen, for example, that means the gate of heavenly peace. But it doesn't look much like a gate when you drive by it. No, it's a towering, massive wall that you cannot get over or around. Tolkien called this black gate of Mordor Moradon. In Zen, we call it Mumonkan. No relation. Kind of coincidental that they sound sort of the same. For Tolkien, the black gate of Moradon was all about the barrier separating the forces of good and evil. Frodo, the unassuming hero, had to pass through this barrier to ensure a peaceful world, but he and his followers couldn't do it. They couldn't open it. They had to go another way. For us, the Mumonkan, or Gateless Gate, is about the barrier that separates samsara and nirvana. Suffering from enlightenment. And it's the door we have to pass through. In Tolkien, the Black Gate is eventually destroyed after Frodo gives up his last remaining self-clinging desires. He risks death to pass through, but then again, he's desperate. I suppose he'd have loved it if someone else could have done it for him. Like, with my first teacher, I was starting to get this message about the necessity to be willing to do anything. But I wasn't willing. And so I went to Doksan and I said to the teacher, I want you to make me desperate. It's like I was putting it all off on him. I mean, do you see how green that was? How naive that was? And he just laughed at me and he said, is that what you want? Putting it right back in my lap, pushing my face right down into my own mess. Sometime later, I had to deal with the Black Gate, really. And I really was very desperate. I loathed it. I hated it. I couldn't get through it. I thought it would kill me. Why does the door to awakening have to be like that? I don't know. Except we are so deeply conditioned. And it doesn't help that society also wants us to always be thinking of progress in terms of material acquisition and status, power, wealth. That doesn't help. Yeah, we make this separation based on a distorted sense of progress, hoping Zen is going to make us serene and happy. It's Mordor calling. So it's a great koan for us. How do we get through the Black Gate of Mordor? How do we meet Buddha there? It's pretty simple, really. I think we have to take these questions we have, questions like, what am I getting out of this? Why am I doing this? Why am I still doing this? And instead of just letting them hang there, causing so much frustration, maybe try first to recognize the doctrinal response to that. You're not missing anything, so what would you be getting? You're already perfect, whole and complete, just the way you are. I say this every time I talk, don't I? And you guys keep coming back. Because we don't really realize it. My saying so doesn't make it the experiential reality. We have to stop separating ourselves from Zen. Real progress means realizing Zen is just you. It's your life, warts and all. There's no Zen apart from that. And that's your door, that's your iron gate. And there's the Buddha standing right there in that ugly, tedious, frustrating, desperate place, crawling with orcs and whatever, mountain trolls, I guess. The reality is that the thing we most want to get out of Zen is already intrinsic to our nature. Each of us is already bestowed with it. Each of us already has innate Buddha wisdom, Buddha compassion. It's just a matter of putting away our desires, put down your precious. Put down all of your preciouses. Drop them into the volcano of non-attachment, let's say. And then when you do that, you meet the Buddha in Mordor. The Black Gate is gone. It was never there. You invented it. And once that happens, then you can wander Mordor without fear. Or you could sweep the floor. You could watch a pot until it boils. You can put on your shoes and shovel the walk. Thanks for listening. Any questions from our video peeps?
There was one. They said, I have definitely felt some growth out of desperation and some peace in the quiet, such that of late I feel like my own 5-second delay. How do I shake that?
What was that last part?
Said, such that of late I feel like my own 5-second delay. How do I shake that?
Oh, yeah. I've heard people say this, versions of this, like, I keep getting in my own way. So there's lots of ways to answer that, and I won't have time to talk about all of them, but lately I've been doing more reading about shikantaza, or the Chinese would have called silent illumination. And one of the wonderful things about shikantaza is that it's a practice, like when we get really good at it, we are in a, let's say, kind of like in a continuous state of movement, because our awareness exists only moment by moment. We can stay aware of a thought object for longer than a moment. But in shikantaza, where there is no object upon which we are ultimately concentrating, we are only just being aware. That can be sustained for a long time, but moment by moment, there's no self there. And I guess this would correspond to the silence part of silent illumination. The illumination part corresponds to pure awareness. And so I would advocate really developing your ability to sit shikantaza, and then try extending that meditative experience into your daily life. Theoretically, you can be fully engaged with washing the dishes or walking the dog or something like that, while also being aware moment by moment. It's not the same as mindfulness, where you're kind of focused on specifics in the environment, noticing the candle, noticing the light, noticing the itch on your back or something like that, sequentially without judgment. It's a good practice. But in shikantaza, it's highly generalized. The entire environment and the practitioner ultimately become one, moment by moment. You can just barely even notice that it's happening to you, in a sense. And as soon as you do, it's gone. Then you're back to your 5-second delay. And that's okay. You can't sustain this all the time. But at least shikantaza will give you a taste of how to close that gap. Anything else? All right. So, bong, that's bong. Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to save them. Desires are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. The dharmas are boundless. I vow to master them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to attain it. Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to save them. Desires are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. The dharmas are boundless. I vow to master them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to attain it. Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to save them. Desires are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. The dharmas are boundless. I to master them. The Buddha way is unsurpassed.